I was never the child they believed in. I'm writing this here because this subreddit feels like the only place where people actually understand how deep family favoritism can go. This is about my parents, my brother, and growing up knowing I was never meant to be the main character in my own family. From the moment I was born, it was clear I wasn't what they were hoping for. My parents already had a son, and in their minds, he was the future. The one who would achieve great things, make the family proud, and go far in life. They talked about him like success was guaranteed, like it was only a matter of time. And then there was me. They never openly said they didn't love me, but their actions spoke louder than words ever could. I was treated like a backup plan. The child who was supposed to exist quietly, not demand too much, not expect too much. If my brother failed, they made excuses. If I succeeded, they downplayed it. He's just more ambitious. She's doing okay, I guess. That kind of thing. Even as a kid, I felt it. The lack of excitement when I entered a room. The way my achievements were brushed off while my brother's smallest efforts were praised. It messes with you when you grow up feeling like love is conditional, like you have to earn space just to exist. The only person who never made me feel invisible was my grandmother. She was the one constant source of warmth in a house that felt emotionally cold. She listened to me. She defended me. She saw potential in me when my parents only saw the spare. Looking back now, I understand something painful but important. The unfairness didn't start later. It didn't slowly appear over time. It was there from the very beginning. As we got older, the favoritism stopped being subtle and started becoming loud. My parents compared us constantly. Not in a healthy, motivating way, but in a way that slowly eats at you. Every mistake I made was a flaw in my character. Every mistake my brother made was just a phase. If I got a good grade, the response was, "That's expected." If he got an average one, it was, "See? He's smart, he just doesn't apply himself yet." Dinner conversations somehow always turned into evaluations. Why wasn't I more confident like him? Why wasn't I louder, bolder, more something? My mom loved to frame it as concern, but it never felt like care. It felt like criticism wearing a friendly mask. The worst part was how it destroyed my self-esteem without anyone noticing or caring. I started believing I was inherently less valuable, that no matter how hard I worked, I'd always come second. I stopped raising my hand. I stopped sharing my goals. I learned that being invisible hurt less than being compared. Meanwhile, my brother grew up cushioned by praise and excuses. Failure never scared him because someone was always there to catch him. I didn't have that safety net. I had pressure, silence, and the quiet understanding that if I fell, no one would rush to help. By the time I was a teenager, the message was clear. He was the investment. I was the backup. And that belief followed me everywhere. By the time I finished school, I already knew one thing for sure. If I stayed, I would slowly disappear. My parents had zero interest in my future. Not really. They talked endlessly about my brother's potential, which universities he could attend, which career paths would be worthy of him, how he just needed time to shine. When it came to me, the conversation was short and dry. You'll figure something out. You don't need anything fancy. College isn't for everyone. The irony is that I did get into a prestigious university, one I worked insanely hard for. Exams, sleepless nights, constant self-doubt, all of it. When the acceptance letter came, I remember standing in the kitchen, holding it, waiting for some kind of reaction. My mom barely looked up. My dad said, "That's nice," and immediately changed the subject to my brother. There was just one problem, the tuition. My parents made it very clear they wouldn't help. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't see the point. Investing in me wasn't a priority. They said things like, "Why spend so much on her, and she doesn't need all that." That's when my grandmother stepped in. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply said, if she earned it, she deserves it. She paid for my education. Every semester. Every fee. She checked in on me, encouraged me, reminded me that I wasn't crazy for wanting more. Leaving for university felt like escaping gravity. For the first time, I wasn't constantly compared. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit someone else's expectations. I was terrified, but I was free. And deep down, I think my parents assumed I'd fail. They were wrong. University didn't magically fix my self-esteem, but it gave me something I'd never had before: space to grow without being judged at every step. I worked harder than everyone I knew, not because I was competing, but because I was terrified of going back. Failing wasn't just failure to me. It felt like proof that my parents had been right all along. That fear pushed me, but it also sharpened me. After graduating, I got a job in my field faster than I expected. Not through connections. Not through favors. Just interviews, preparation, and persistence. I remember calling my parents to tell them. My mom said, "That's good." My dad asked how my brother was doing at the moment. At work, things were different. My team was supportive. People listened when I spoke. My manager actually mentored me instead of tearing me down. The first time my boss praised my work in a meeting, I almost cried, not because of the praise itself, but because I realized how starved I'd been for it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the backup. I was competent, respected, trusted. I made friends who didn't see me as lesser. I started believing, slowly and carefully, that maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe the problem had never been me. Every small success felt surreal. Promotions, raises, responsibility. I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. A part of me still expected it to be taken away. But it wasn't. For the first time, my life was moving forward quietly, steadily, without my parents' approval. And that scared them more than my failure ever could have. A few years into my job, something shifted inside me. Not dramatically, just a quiet confidence that started replacing fear. I was careful with money. Almost obsessively careful. I didn't grow up believing anyone would catch me if I fell, so I built my safety net brick by brick. I saved. I skipped things. I planned everything twice. Owning something of my own became a symbol in my head, not of success, but of security. When I finally realized I had enough saved for a down payment, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not even my friends at first. I was scared of jinxing it, but also scared of hearing it minimized. The day I signed the papers and got the keys, I sat alone in the empty house and cried. Not happy tears. Not exactly sad ones either. Just release. For the first time in my life, I owned a space where no one could compare me, belittle me, or make me feel like I didn't belong. Every wall, every room, every quiet moment was mine. When I eventually told my parents, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. No congratulations. No pride. My mom asked how much it cost and immediately said it sounded risky. My dad warned me about responsibility. My brother made a joke about how I was lucky. Lucky. They didn't see the years of pressure, the fear of failing, the nights I stayed up worrying about money. To them, my achievement was either inconvenient or threatening. I should have recognized it then. My success wasn't going to bring me closer to my family. It was going to expose everything they'd been pretending not to see. While my life was finally stabilizing, my brother's wasn't. Growing up, my parents were convinced he was destined for greatness. Everything he did was potential. Every mistake was just a phase. They poured time, money, and endless belief into him. I was the backup plan. He was the future. But adulthood doesn't care about family narratives. He bounced between programs, dropped opportunities, quit when things got hard. Every failure was blamed on someone else: bad professors, unfair bosses, jealous people. And every time he stumbled, my parents caught him. He moved back home. Then stayed longer. They paid his bills, covered his debts, made excuses to relatives. And slowly, quietly, the disappointment they refused to feel toward him started leaking out sideways, toward me. Comments like, "Well, you're doing fine, so you can help a little. Family supports each other. Don't be selfish, your brother just needs time." Time. The thing I was never given. Watching this was painful, but also confusing. I wasn't angry at him yet, I was still trying to be understanding. I knew what it felt like to disappoint them, even if I'd never been allowed to. But something changed in him when he realized I was doing better than expected. It wasn't just envy. It was resentment, sharp, quiet, and growing. And I didn't see how far he was willing to go with it until it was almost too late. I found out the hard way that resentment doesn't always explode loudly. Sometimes it whispers first, to the right people, at the right time. It started small. A weird comment from a coworker. A meeting that suddenly felt tense for no clear reason. My manager asking me questions that didn't quite make sense, like they were circling something they hadn't said out loud yet. Then HR emailed me. They said there had been concerns raised about my behavior. Nothing concrete. Just vague allegations. Things like dishonesty, unprofessional conduct, conflicts of interest. Words that sound harmless until you realize they're the kind that can quietly end a career. I was blindsided. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A mix-up. Someone confusing me with someone else. I kept replaying every interaction in my head, trying to figure out what I could have possibly done. Then a mutual acquaintance slipped up. Apparently, my brother had been talking. A lot. To anyone who would listen. He painted me as manipulative, arrogant, someone who stepped on people to get ahead. He implied I had used connections, bent rules, maybe even taken advantage of others. He never accused me directly, he didn't need to. He just planted doubts and let them grow. And the worst part? My parents didn't stop him. When I confronted them, my mom said things like, "He's just venting. You know how sensitive he is. If there's nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried." I was worried because I had everything to lose. At the same time, things started happening with my house. Anonymous complaints to the city. Questions about permits that had already been approved. Paperwork suddenly missing. It felt coordinated, even if no one would admit it. I barely slept. I was constantly nauseous. Every email notification felt like a threat. I had worked my entire life to escape being powerless, and suddenly, I was right back there. The irony? The people trying to take my life apart were the ones who had watched me build it from nothing. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't jealousy anymore. There was a moment, more than one honestly, where I thought about walking away from everything. Quitting the job. Selling the house. Starting over somewhere no one knew my last name. The stress was that heavy. It would have been easier to disappear than to keep explaining myself over and over. But something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet refusal. I documented everything. Emails. Messages. Timelines. I requested formal meetings instead of hallway conversations. I asked for allegations in writing. I stayed calm when I wanted to scream, because I knew the truth didn't need theatrics, it needed structure. At work, HR investigated properly once I pushed for transparency. And when they did, the rumors collapsed under their own weight. No evidence. No patterns. No corroboration. Just noise. My manager apologized. Privately. Sincerely. They told me I was valued and that my work record spoke for itself. I kept my job. My reputation survived bruised, but intact. The house situation resolved too. Every complaint was traced back to baseless reports. Inspections passed. Documents resurfaced. Nothing stuck. I wish I could say my family supported me through this. They didn't. My parents acted like the whole thing was unfortunate drama. My brother denied everything, then switched to playing the victim when confronted. But I had something they didn't expect. Proof. Stability. And the growing realization that I didn't need their approval to defend myself. I didn't just keep my job and my home. I kept myself. You'd think surviving that would change something. It didn't. Once it became clear that I wasn't going to lose my job or my house, my parents' tone shifted. Not too apologetic. Not too supportive. Too entitled. It started with casual comments. Your brother is really struggling right now. You're in such a good position compared to him. Family should help family. Then it stopped being subtle. They sat me down and explained, like it was obvious, like it was reasonable, that since I was successful, I should contribute financially. Not to emergencies. Not to shared family needs. Directly to supporting my brother. Rent. Bills. Getting him back on his feet. I reminded them, carefully, that they had never invested in me the way they had in him. That my education was paid for by my grandmother. That I built my career alone. My mom waved that away. That's in the past. Don't keep score. But they had kept score my entire life, just never in my favor. When I hesitated, they accused me of being cold, of changing, of forgetting where I came from. My dad said something that still echoes in my head. If you hadn't been so selfish, your brother wouldn't feel so behind. Selfish. For surviving. For succeeding. For not collapsing under the weight they were so ready to place on me. They didn't ask if I could help. They told me I should. I didn't refuse immediately. That's the part that still makes me uncomfortable to admit. A piece of me, the part they trained for years, wanted to comply. To smooth things over. To prove I wasn't ungrateful. I caught myself doing the math in my head, calculating how much of my own stability I could sacrifice without falling apart. That terrified me, because it meant they still had influence. So I took a breath and said no. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just clearly. I told them I wasn't going to financially support my brother. That I wished him well, but his life wasn't my responsibility. The reaction was immediate and brutal. My mom cried, loudly, performatively. She said she couldn't believe she'd raised someone so heartless. My dad went quiet, then cold. He said I'd changed and that success had made me arrogant. They told relatives. Twisted the story. Suddenly I was the daughter who abandoned her family, who thought she was better than everyone else. My brother didn't say much. He didn't need to. He let them fight for him. And for a moment, I almost gave in. The guilt was suffocating. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I questioned myself constantly. Was I cruel? Was I wrong? Was I betraying them? But then I remembered something important. They had never once worried about how I would survive. Why was I expected to worry about everyone else? Saying no didn't make me heartless. It just exposed who benefited from me never having boundaries. The only person who ever stood up for me. Just when I thought I was completely alone in this, my grandmother stepped in. She had been quiet for a long time. Not because she didn't care, but because she had been watching. Listening. Waiting for the moment when the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. When my parents started calling her, complaining about how ungrateful I was, and how I was abandoning the family, they expected sympathy. They didn't get it. My grandmother shut it down immediately. She reminded them calmly, but firmly, that they hadn't paid for my education. That they hadn't supported my career. That they hadn't protected me when my brother spread lies that nearly destroyed my life. You didn't give her anything to be grateful for, she told them. So stop demanding repayment. That sentence hit harder than any argument I could have made myself. She pointed out how they had always bet on my brother and treated me like a backup plan. How every achievement of mine was minimized, while every failure of his was excused. How love in that house had always been conditional, and I had never met the conditions. My parents tried to argue, to interrupt, to rewrite history. She didn't let them. For the first time in my life, someone said out loud what I had always felt but never been allowed to name. The unfairness was real. And suddenly, I wasn't doubting myself anymore. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't wrong. I was just done carrying what was never mine to begin with. After my grandmother spoke up, things didn't magically improve. There was no apology. No sudden self-reflection. Just distance. My parents stopped calling as much. When they did, conversations felt stiff, transactional. They avoided talking about money, but the resentment hung in the air like humidity, heavy, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. And honestly, that was fine. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval or trying to fix something that had never been whole. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped defending my choices. Stopped oversharing details of my life that they could twist or use against me. I set boundaries, real ones. Limited contact. Neutral topics only. No financial discussions. No emotional labor. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce anything. I didn't cut them off completely. I just stepped back. That space was healing in ways I didn't expect. Without their constant pressure, I slept better. I laughed more. I felt lighter. I realized how much energy I'd spent managing their emotions instead of living my own life. My brother faded into the background too. Without me as a comparison point, He had nowhere to direct his frustration. Last I heard, my parents were still supporting him. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. And that felt like the real victory. Here's the part people don't talk about enough. Even when you make the right decision, it still hurts. Walking away didn't feel like empowerment at first. It felt like grief. Not for what I lost, but for what I never had and kept hoping might still appear if I tried harder. I grieved the idea of parents who would one day look at me and say, "We were wrong." I grieved the version of childhood where love wasn't conditional, where success didn't come with guilt, where being a daughter was enough. Letting go meant admitting that version of my family was never coming. There were nights I replayed old memories and saw them differently. Moments I thought were normal suddenly looked cruel. Jokes that weren't jokes. Silence that wasn't neutral. Praise that was always redirected to my brother somehow. And I let myself feel it, the anger, the sadness, the jealousy of people who could call their parents for comfort without bracing themselves first. That grief didn't mean I wanted them back the way things were. It meant I was finally being honest with myself. I started therapy around this time. Not because I was broken, but because I didn't want to carry their voices in my head forever. I learned that distance doesn't make you heartless. That boundaries don't erase love, they define what kind of love is survivable. Some days were still heavy, but they were mine. With the noise gone, I had space to decide what I actually wanted, not what I was trained to want. I started investing more in the people who showed up without conditions. Friends who celebrated my wins without envy. Colleagues who respected me without needing to be convinced. My grandmother, who remained steady and unapologetically on my side. I realized something important. Family isn't about who demands the most from you. It's about who doesn't make you feel smaller to feel bigger themselves. I hosted my first holiday in my own house. It was quiet, warm, no tension, no comparisons, no subtle digs disguised as concern. Just laughter, good food, and the kind of peace I used to think was unrealistic. For the first time, my home felt like a sanctuary, not a trophy, not a bargaining chip, not something to justify. My parents weren't there. And while that was bittersweet, it was also honest. I stopped waiting for them to change. I stopped hoping my success would finally earn me love. I accepted that some people only know how to love when they're in control. Letting go of that expectation didn't make me bitter. It made me whole. What I learned and why I'm posting this. I didn't write this because I hate my parents. I wrote it because I spent too many years believing their version of the story, the one where I was less lucky or ungrateful. The truth is harder and simpler. I survived a system that was never built for me. If you're the child who is always compared, always second, always expected to sacrifice, please hear this. Your worth is not measured by how much you can carry for others. You don't owe gratitude to people who withheld support. And success doesn't obligate you to fix the consequences of someone else's choices. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't confronting your family. It's stepping back and choosing yourself anyway. If you're in a similar situation, you're not cruel. You're not selfish. You're not imagining the imbalance. You're just waking up. Thanks for reading.